Greetings all. Today we discuss the rise of the pre-Greek civilizations, New Kingdom Egypt, the fall of the Bronze Age, and set ourselves to discuss the Phoenicians next time. Let's begin with Hesiod. Now, Hesiod lays out 5 stages of human history evolving particularly with humanity. It's predominantly a reflection on actual developments, as you will see.
The Greek poet Hesiod, who lived between 750 and 650 BCE, outlined his 5 ages in his poem, The Works and Days. His list is the Golden Age. The Golden Age is the only age that falls within the rule of Kronos. Created by immortals who lived on Olympus, these humans were said to live among the gods and freely mingled with them. Peace and harmony prevailed during this age. Humans did not have to work to feed themselves, for the earth provided food in abundance. They lived to very old age, but with a youthful appearance, and eventually died peacefully. The Silver Age. The Silver Age and every age that follows fall within the rule of Cronus' successor and son, Zeus. Men in the Silver Age lived for 100 years under the dominion of their mothers. They lived only a short time as grown adults and spent that time in strife with one another.
Next in his list, we have the Bronze Age, also sometimes known as the Copper Age. Men of the Bronze Age were hardened and tough, as war was their purpose and their passion. Zeus created these humans out of an ash tree. Their armor was forged of bronze, as were their homes and tools. What a bronze house, that'd be kind of dope. We have the heroic age. The heroic age is the one age that does not correspond with any metal, as you may have noticed. It is also the only age that improves upon the age it followed. It was the heroes of this age who fought at Thebes and Troy. This group of humans died and went to Elysium. We have the Iron Age, where Hesiod finds himself. During this age, humans live in an existence of toil and misery. Children dishonor their parents, brother fights brother, and the social contact between guest and host, the xenia, is long forgotten. During this age, might makes right, and bad men use lies to thwart the good.
Developments in the ancient Near East. We have new imperial powers, a web of diplomacy, trade, and exchange, iron and bronze, new and more brutal empires, emergence of new religious traditions.
The Bronze Age is an age of migration, at least between 2000 and 1400 BCE, where we are discussing. We have Sir William Jones, who notes the similarity of vocabulary and grammar of Sanskrit, Greek, and Latin. He would later examine the similarities of Germanic, Celtic, and Old Persian. He would hypothesize an Indo European language group, and it's largely him that we can thank. The figure you're seeing here, migrations of the Bronze Age, same date, notice the geographical relationships among the older centers of Mesopotamia and Egypt, and among the newer civilizations such as Babylonia, Assyria, Phoenicia, and of course the Hittites. We'll get to them later. Which of these emerging cultures was most likely to come into contact with Egypt, and why? Where did the Indo European peoples come from? What was the impact of Indo European settlements? Here's a hint: it involves their language and trade.
Now we have some new settlers in Anatolia. By 1900 BCE, Assyrian caravan merchants created trade networks throughout Anatolia and Mesopotamia. New population groups were attracted to Anatolia, northern Syria, and Mesopotamia. The most formidable of these were the Hittites, an Indo European speaking people who arrived around 2000 BCE. This slide is an ancient war chariot, a light spoke wheeled chariot developed for warfare. is here being used for lion hunting by the Assyrian king Asshurnasirpal II from 883 to 859 BCE.
It's a long lion hunt.
Truly.
Let's dive into the Hittites. By 1700 BCE, they have created their own kingdom. After about 50 years later, they captured the strategic mountain stronghold of Hattusas. The king would take a new name, Hattusilis, to commemorate this fact. We have the horse-drawn chariot dominating as an engine of war. It would transport archers rapidly around the battlefield. They would adopt cuneiform and begin to record their language and laws. They would control trade routes, especially gaining control of copper and arsenic. Remember, guys, you can alloy copper not just with tin, but also with lead or arsenic as well to create bronze. Not always as good, but you can do it. You can also alloy it with aluminum too. The Hittites were military conquerors and colonists. They would impose themselves and their language throughout Anatolia. Under Hattusilis and his successors, the Hittite warrior aristocracy would field the most fearsome army of the Bronze Age. In 1595, they would sack Babylon. Around 1500 BCE, the Kessites would move into Mesopotamia and dominate the area for the next 500 years. The Hittites would dominate Anatolia, but their powers were checked by the Mitanni, occupied Syria around 1550 BCE. Take note of the Mitanni, it will be on the test.
For now, let's move on to the new kingdom in Egypt. Egypt's Middle Kingdom ended with the invasion of the Hyksos, who were rulers of foreign lands, around 1700 BCE. The Hyksos adapted Egyptian precedents, including the sun god Ra. Hyksos domination was seen as shameful by the Egyptians. Their conquest weakened Egypt's hold over the Nubians, who eventually founded an independent kingdom called Kush.
Incidentally, if there are any Robert E. Howard fans in the audience, you will notice many familiar names. So, thank you, Conan, for immortalizing these names in our pop culture forever and a day. But that said, Egypt would enter its second intermediate period, 1650 to 1550 BCE. By the end of the 16th century, the pharaoh Ahmose had driven out the Hyksos, establishing the 18th dynasty and what we know as the New Kingdom of Egypt.
The 18th dynasty. In the 18th dynasty, the Egyptian civilization reached the height of its magnificence and power. This dynasty ruled Egypt for more than 2.5 centuries. It created a new aristocracy whose wealth was acquired through warfare and the winning of lands and slaves.
Egyptian civilization would reach the height of its power, which it exercised more widely than ever before. Many older Egyptian traditions were renewed and strengthened, but the dynamism of the new kingdom was its particular drive toward imperial expansion. It changed the very fabric of Egyptian life and now extended far beyond the narrow world of the fertile Nile Valley. Pharaoh Ahmose's eventual successor, Thutmose I, was the son of an unknown warrior who married Ahmose's daughter. And under Thutmose, we have a couple of points. He secures Nubia in the south, and of course, its vast gold mines, and this would finance his war machine. Egypt would penetrate far beyond their northern frontier, driving deep into both Palestine and Syria.
Now we have powerful women, such as Hatshepsut. Like her great grandmother, Ahotep, Hatshepsut was a warrior, portrayed as a masculine figure with a ceremonial beard characteristic of pharaohs. She did not pretend to be a man, claimed to be the most beautiful woman in the world. Thutmose II, who lived between 1492 and 1479 BCE, passed the power of Pharaoh to his sister, wife, and co-ruler, Hatshepsut, who lived between 1479 and 1458 BCE. For 21 years, Hatshepsut ruled as pharaoh in her own right. Hatshepsut would send raiding expeditions to Byblos and the Sinai Peninsula shortly after an expedition to Punt. While very little is known, her foreign policy was largely peaceful. Regardless, it is possible that she led military campaigns against Nubia and Canaan. But after her death, attempts were made to remove her name from inscriptions and to destroy her images, probably by Amenhotep II, who lived between 1427 and 1400 BCE.
Hatshepsut's statecraft would prove crucial to the continuing success of Egypt. With Thutmose III, the son of one of her brother's lesser wives, she would launch several successful military campaigns to extend both trade and diplomacy. The arts would flourish. This would set standards that would be emulated for the next 1,000 years. Her own mortuary temple, housing the remains of her and her father, was one of, if not the first, tomb constructed in the Valley of the Kings, the New Kingdom's answer to the pyramids. Once again, if you don't want your tomb robbed, don't put a huge capstone on it that says, "Come rob me." They're starting to learn.
Now, this slide is the mortuary temple of Hatshepsut. Unlike the pharaohs of the Old Kingdom, those of the 18th dynasty chose to be buried in specially built temples rather than in separate pyramids. The innovative architecture of Hatshepsut's temple, which was built into a hillside and set off by rows of columns, was widely imitated by her successors. On the left, we have the defaced head of Hatshepsut. On the right, the defaced statue of Hatshepsut.
Now, at this time, we have some religious and political changes to consider. The great conquest of the 18th dynasty would bring great wealth to Egypt. See the Nubian mines. Wealth would go to construct grand temples, tombs, monuments, such as an example, the Temple of Anan in Thebes. As the temples would become more wealthy and powerful, surprise, surprise, so do the priests. The priests at Thebes would become a formidable political and economic force, eventually surpassing the military aristocracy in importance. Once again, it's always pharaoh, bureaucracy, priests, military. There's a balancing act going on here. Sometimes the priests win, sometimes the pharaoh wins, sometimes the military wins. Remember, the pharaoh is supposed to ideally fill all three, but this is how we get intermediate periods.
Now we have Ammon, who was the god of creation and had come into prominence during the Middle Kingdom when Thebes was the capital. By 1550 BCE, he had become identified as another manifestation of the sun god Ra, hence Ammon Ra, believed to be the divine force behind the triumph over the Hyksos. We have the stele of Hatshepsut and Thutmose. We have this stele of Thutmose and Hatshepsut from the Red Chapel at Karnak.
So, let's talk about the black sheep of the family, that is to say, Akhenaten, 1352 to 1336 BCE. Notice his rule was not very long. Pharaoh Amenhotep IV would exalt Ra and replace his iconography with the symbol of Aten, the hieroglyph representing the sun's rays. The Egyptian priesthood would continue traditional polytheism, but Akhenaten proposed a new form of monotheism. How dare he? Now, he does have a pretty serious legacy of spiritual revolution, and this very well could have been done to deprive the priests of power. He opposed the priests directly. He lost the support of nobles for neglecting Egyptian society in favor of his new holy life. He would be deposed and succeeded by his son Tutankhamun, the famous child king whose tomb was discovered, of course, not too recently anymore, who would reign some 1333 to 1324 BCE. Once again, another short reign for him.
Now, Amenhotep IV changed his own name to Akhenaten, he who is profitable to the Aten, and he built a new capital to honor Aten. Akhenaten proposed a new form of monotheism. Aten could not be imagined as taking on human or animal form. There is a new focus on the pharaoh's humanity as Akhenaten had himself pictured as human in the company of his families.
Here we have Akhenaten and his wife Nefertiti, and of course their other children. The Aten is depicted here as a sun's disk radiating power down to the royal family. Notice the almost alien or stretched features in this image, and how does this depiction of the pharaoh differ from the earlier precedents? Notice, as an example, how effeminate Akhenaten is. Here we also have the throne of Tutankhamun for a lovely compare and contrast. This dates to about 1330 BCE. This relief in gold and silver is part of the back of the young pharaoh's throne. Although the reign of the boy king marked the rejection of Akhenaten's theology and the utter abandonment of his new city, the informal aesthetic style formed by his father is still detectable here. He is relaxed in a lounging position, particularly of the pharaoh here, and the intimate, confiding gesture to his queen, Akhenaten. Right, that's as good as it gets, guys. Sorry.
Now let's leave Egypt for now and discuss the trade networks of the late Bronze Age. This is where we have an age of superpowers. The 18th dynasty had transformed Egypt into a conquering state, and we have transnational diplomacy. Although warfare was common, correspondence between rulers forged alliances and promoted mutual goals and understandings. We have gifts, we have marriage contracts, and of course, we have professional envoys and emissaries.
The political and economic networks would create alliances and relationships that would transcend any idea of national identity or national boundary. The Hittites created an empire in Anatolia, the Assyrians would dominate trade, and the Kassites of Babylonia would remain a significant force in economic and military relationships.
Now, let's examine long distance trade. We have goods from the Baltic, Africa, India, and the Far East. We have a diffusion of goods, art, ideas, technology, which also help to stimulate trading ports like Ugarit. Large numbers of merchants speaking different languages, which spurred the development of a written script based on consonants, easily mastered and more flexible than cuneiform.
And remember, for those of us practicing Semitic languages, the use of consonants, at least according to Jackson Crawford and other linguists, much easier to do. So it might not make much sense to you to have a language without vowels. They could make it work. So, moving on from linguistics, let's continue looking at some transnational trade and the outcomes thereof. The search for markets, resources, and trade routes would promote a greater understanding of the world around them. Pharaoh Ramses II established good, friendly relations with the Hittites. Greater integration would mean greater mutual dependence, and we see this as a key to the late Bronze Age. Many of the new markets depended on emerging societies in unstable regions. How does that sound like today? Egypt and its neighbors here. Take a look at this map. This dates to about 1400 BCE. Let's consider what is the major change on this map compared to the previous map of Bronze Age civilizations way back in chapter 1? What developments would have enabled trade to flourish during this period?
We will start with the Minoan thalassocracy. We know very little about the Minoans, however, let me paint you a picture with what we do have. Thucydides was correct. A very wealthy sea empire began to flourish on the island of Crete around 2500 BCE. Thereafter, for about a millennium, the Minoans controlled shipping around the central Mediterranean and the Aegean. and may have exacted tribute from many smaller islands. At its height, between 1900 and 1500 BCE, a contemporary of Egypt's Middle Kingdom and the Hittite Old Kingdom, it was virtually unassailable by outside forces, protected by the surrounding sea.
In short, let's consider the Minoans as follows. They are a trading empire that is palace centered. Their central palace is at Knossos. It would cover several acres, including several hundred rooms. This is the inspiration for the labyrinth. The palace had large frescoed walls, indoor plumbing, potentially ritualistic enactments such as bull leaping, which could have been a possible use of human sacrifice, whether incidental or otherwise. We'll get to that. They did use the linear A script, which still remains undeciphered, but it would influence the Mycenaean linear B, which of course we do have. Have a look at this Minoan fresco from about 1500 BCE. We have a stylized representation of bull leaping, painting into the plaster wall of Knossos. What do we think? Is this fresco likely to represent real practices? Is this some kind of act of human sacrifice? Is this potentially a religious thing or maybe just a festival kind of test of manliness or something? So consider this. Why or why not? What can we know?
Now let's look at the Mycenaeans. Now they flourished around 1400 BCE, and they actually did subjugate Crete. The Griffin warrior tomb with Minoan grave goods buried there before the construction of the citadel at Pylos. The Mycenaeans influenced Crete culturally and religiously and politically, but by about 1200 BCE, the Mycenaean civilization collapsed.
By 1500 BCE, large Mycenaean citadels would dot Greece, predominantly Pylos as an example. By 1400 BCE, they had taken over the Minoan trading network and expanded it. What do we mean when we say the Mycenaeans were influenced by Crete? Culturally, religiously, politically? Well, Minoan palaces would become large Mycenaean citadels. Citadels were centers of government and used for storage and redistribution of trade goods. Mycenaeans would create a system of well fortified city states led by a king, but also by a war leader. That way, if your war leader dies, your government doesn't collapse. Say, but seriously, have a look at Mycenaean Greece here. What stands out about the geography of Greece? How might the geography have allowed Mycenaean culture to spread so widely?
Well, all good things must come to an end, and for the Mycenaeans and others, it was by the hands of the sea peoples. Possible theories to explain Mycenaean collapse include drought, famine, disease, and social unrest. The consequences of the collapse would really be waves of devastation and destruction. Ramses III and the Sea Peoples, who were earlier employed as mercenaries. We have the Philistines and Palestine. Disruption of Mycenaean communication and trade, overpopulation, and violence led to the waves of refugees.
And while we don't know much, what we do know comes from contemporary accounts of the survivors, as well as missives asking for help and sending warnings. Those diplomatic alliances coming in handy. From the fragmentary record, we can figure out the following. Number one, the Hittite Empire is utterly eradicated. Two, the Mycenaean citadels would be depopulated by some 90%. And three, the Egyptians, along with a few others, would survive but be greatly weakened. Assyria, as an example, had to fight for its very existence.
Now, we can't end on such a low note. Let's give them a preview. The Phoenicians, who were Canaanites, after 1200 BCE, emerged from Egyptian control. We have city states with a royal government, but colonies with aristocratic government. trading networks, papyrus, cedar, glass, ivory.
Here we go, there's at least one more Mycenaean grave we should visit, because of course we can't end on a happy note. Here's the grave of the Griffin warrior Hylos. The contents of this Mycenaean tomb were discovered in 2015, now a decade ago. God, I feel old. Reveal the extent of the connections between Mycenaean Greece and, of course, Minoan Crete. This photograph shows a bronze mirror in its original location. The Bronze Age would end much like it began, in fire and in chaos. Please join us for part 2, where we, of course, cover the latter half of the unit, including, as I'm sure you may guess, the Phoenicians and more.